Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. This is our second run at today's podcast due to, ironically, tech issues at my end. So many thanks to my guest today for already being, extremely patient in the process of putting together today's episode. We're going to dive straight into it because it's getting towards the end of the working week for my guest today as he joins us from his base over in Amsterdam. We're sort of mid-afternoon here in the UK, so they're an hour ahead of us, and I'm sure with one eye on wrapping up the week is our guest today, Events Director for TNW, Butler. Zach, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. And as I said, apologies for keeping you and having the patience of a saint for dealing with the tech dropout that I had on our first run at this.
No problem. Thanks for having me, James. Appreciate it. We've all experienced it, right, in the era of virtual events, so it happens. But
Absolutely.
lucky we're only a few minutes in, weren't we? So
Absolutely, and the irony, of course, being that we have our own affiliation to the event tech industry, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about today and the work that you do and that TNW, the marketplace at TNW services and looks after is very much tech related. Let's use that as a start point of the conversation today, if we can, Zach. Tell us a little bit about TNW as a business.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, so TNW stands for the Next Web. We're based in Amsterdam, but we operate European, if not globally. Back in 2006, our two founders, Boris and Patrick, they had a promising startup idea that they wanted to take over to seek investment in Silicon Valley. It's quite often the case they couldn't afford to do that, so they decided to try and rally together a group of people in Amsterdam that was interested in the future of technology. And that became TNW Conference. So in 2006, we had 200 people come to the first event, and now today in its 18th year, we have around 12,000 attendees that represent the startup, investor, corporate, and government agency ecosystem. That's just one part of the business. TNW has four different business lines, and everything we do is about multiplying the journeys of startups. So startups and founders are our core, and if they succeed, we succeed. So that starts with our media platform. So we have thenextweb.com, just like Events Industry News, where our editorial reporters are writing about the future of technology across various different articles each day. We also then have commercial real estate. So we have two co-working communities based in Amsterdam, where we have about 85 startups that are creating and developing future technologies, and they're sitting all around us and learning, succeeding, failing every day. And we exist to help make those connections and give them a space to create some great things. We obviously have the events where that comes together at a live moment throughout the year at the big festivals. And then we also then run a number of open innovation consulting programs where we help corporates, government, and foreign direct investment agencies scout really niche startups and uncover talented startups for very specific problems that they might have facing their business. And then a couple of years ago now, back in 2019, the Financial Times took its initial stake in TNW as part of an acquisition, and then kind of through 3 years of COVID, and then this year now the FT have now wholly acquired TNW, so now 100% part of the Financial Times group, which is a nice link to I think a previous podcast guest that you've
Absolutely,
had
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So.
We should reference the wonderful, awesome Francesconi from FT Live who joined us on the podcast. And as Zach has just pointed out, Financial Times now own and acquired TNW. But obviously, you're over in Amsterdam, and it strikes me that this is still very much a business that retains, or I get the feeling just from talking to you on this today, a sense of identity and independence. And as a business that really understands its marketplace, which is, I guess, why you've gone from having 200 people at the first conference to having 12,000 now.
Yeah, I'd say we live and breathe the journeys of startups and founders, and that's very, very important about everything we do. And the Financial Times know that that's very important about the role and the connection that TNW has with its community that they perhaps are not able to have. They obviously serve the very different markets. We quite often describe it as the suits and the hoodies, and TNW Conference is the place where they come together in that one place during the year, which is a special moment.
The Suits and the Hoodies is a great band name. There needs to be a band out there called they do well in the corporate marketplace. Actually, corporate the suits and the hoodies. They'd be a good
Yeah,
band. Um,
yeah.
the physical manifestation of TNW, so the event itself, given your job title is events director, presumably that is very much your remit and looking after the physical manifestation of it. The numbers that we've already referenced, going from 200 to 12,000, to me represent significant growth in a fairly short period of time. How difficult a process has it been as events director to manage something that sounds like it's growing fairly swiftly?
Yeah, I think the event grew very rapidly in the kind of the early to mid teens. So in the early to kind of the 2012, 2015 mark. And if you think about that, also coincides with the time when the future of the web and the future of technology was very, very much growing. So TNW was a place for people that needed to understand what the future of technology and what the future of the web looked like.
Yeah,
And in that period of time, there was, think about, mobile apps, mobile payments, things like that. Things were really being shaken up. If you then kind of then think about, a couple of years, 2018, 2019, maybe up until 2020, obviously there's always things going on in technology, and emerging technologies is one of the most fascinating spaces because things can really change like that. Companies can become, irrelevant at a flick of a switch. We've even seen it in our own industries.
yeah,
But then and so then in that period of time, the event was actually growing more and more so because it was part of the internationalization, and the event was becoming you could say more adult. The last few years, things have really taken the next step. The kind of the recovery post pandemic, and I'd say the new normal of events has really given us the opportunity to festivalize. Because
yeah,
TNW is very much a festival. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. But then also connect the dots across the community. So yeah, the event's gone through quite a rapid kind of growth process. And then alongside that, I mean, this is obviously before my time as well. I've been with the business for just over 2 years now. But the business also has quite a broad events footprint. For example, in our spaces, in our co-working spaces, we run around 100 different events that are community-based events throughout
wow,
the year.
okay, yeah,
So we've always got those touch points with people within the Dutch tech ecosystem. And then we also have another part of our business line, which is where we white label and we help other events that are perhaps not tech events that might have a startup or a focus around bringing young business into the event. So we help them create their startup programs and you could say become a bit more sexy,
yeah.
if you put it like that as well. So there's different ways that we approach events, not just with our own festival.
For an industry, so the delegates and the attendees at TNW being immersed in the world of tech, and everybody that I've met myself that works in that space, they're usually they can often be quite intense. They're really driven. They work, often long hours. They're really, really focused on an outcome. Do you find that when they actually then come to your event, that there is not just a process of learning that they want to undergo in terms of the content that's available to them, but that there is a huge sort of social aspect to this as well in terms of meeting other people and peers within their group?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd probably say I think people that are working in developing and emerging and investing and creating technologies or adopting and integrating them into business, it's a really hard job. These people are trying to change the world through technology, and quite often they're head down, trying to get things moving. And we see that TNW is a moment for them to kind of lift their head up, and I'd say yeah, like it's a hard job for these people, but they can have a good time while they're doing it.
Yeah,
And that's really where when the real establishment of TNW Conference it really came from a point of the business wasn't events business. The business would never have wanted to be seen as an events business. We would always say that if we can and we still say this now, if we can serve this community in a different way through a different medium, my God, we should go and do that and stop doing this because events are really hard.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it just so happened that bringing people together and in this format is the best way for this market, or one of the best ways for this market to really achieve those goals. And you see that from the tech events market worldwide. certainly on a European level. So it serves this market very well. And so what that meant though, when they were growing the event, is all of the things that we as event organizers, I've spent 13 years in events, and all of the things that process and things around costs. This business was not thinking about them. They were thinking about, if we can create this moment and people can leave TNW with just this one thing, they're going to remember us forever. And so that was really part of the strategy. And then, over the last few years, and as we professionalized and tried to scale and, find efficiencies in the business, it's then more about how do we then bring ourselves into a lane where that can be both sustainable, also drive growth in other directions.
Well, two things: there's sustainability, growth, but also take it in other directions. Unless you have that, it's great having that ambition, and it's great having that creative flair and desire to create a moment for your attendees and people who are coming. But when you add into that, professionalization and certain processes, what that then gives you the ability to do is to scale. And I'm not sure what the exact answer to this is, but are you running events now? Is it just the one event a year, or are there multiple events in different territories? Because again, having those processes in place, if you want to then take it to other territories, is absolutely critical.
Yeah. So today we run the one big festival and one or two smaller, but still quite large, in the thousands of people, regional events. And then we're running lots and lots of different digital, in-person meetups here. So today we have a blended portfolio, which is both scaled, but also with the quantity.
Yeah.
5 years ago, that the business had always had the big event in Amsterdam. That's a kind of flagship, but we also were running had an event in New York, in Sao Paulo, there and everywhere. And there's always, for every business, there's the globalization, or the international plan is obviously part of a business strategy for everyone in some ways. But the challenge that they have in businesses, and other companies will have this too, is if you don't have those processes and you're not using economies of scale, it's impossible to be able to work on one event for 3 months, one event for 3 months, one event for 3 months, and they got to a point where they then realized to focus back on flagship. So really, where I come in, and when the business was looking for my role, is I don't think I'm the most creative person in the world. I think I can be creative, but I'm certainly there's people around me here that are far more creative than me. But what the business needed is they needed that ability to be able to operationalize and professionalize, and to understand where we should be spending our time and maybe where not, so that we can use a bit of sprinkling of that creativity and also with some professionalization to then also drive scale. So I'd say it's kind of the blend of me when I joined the business, and kind of how the business has changed over those few years.
Yeah. How not in any negative way, but how difficult was the process during the acquisition period by the Financial Times, by FT, in terms of, if you're becoming part of wholly owned by them, did they want you to adopt systems, processes? Was there a level of integration that had to happen between yourself as an event and as a business when that acquisition finally took place?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, naturally with any acquisition, there's always some things that you need to align to within a business. So those things have happened. I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this process and growing into the FT is the reasons that the FT acquired TNW, which is we access an audience that the FT probably necessarily couldn't, or doesn't have that huge strength in. So startups, a lot of young people, a lot of creators, creatives. Obviously they're one of the world's leading business publications in business news and at executive level. So the true reason why they acquired TNW in the first place, they stand very true to it, and they really trust us, and that we are the best people and the best brand and the best way to communicate with them. So there's that foundation of trust and belief, which has been a constant. But so what that's meant that we can be more exploratory around the processes, or what things do we retain as a business, and we always talk a lot around, for TNW to flourish, it needs to flourish as TNW.
Yeah.
And so it's given us the ability to be, there's not been a full clean, this is how it's
Sure.
done.
Yeah.
But then I'd also say, and I've worked in big businesses before, big FTSE 50 businesses in Informa for 6 years. Is for the companies that have that process, have that structure, there's a lot of things that businesses like us can get out of it. So
Sure.
there's a lot of benefits from it too.
On the subject of the actual practical deployment of technology, given the marketplace that you serve, you must really have the absolute pick of any sort of platform that you want, and you probably have companies, falling over themselves to try and get your event to use their particular tech,
Mhm.
so that it's in front of that audience. Does that put you in a good position or a bad position? Because I'm never quite sure which way to look at it.
Yeah,
How do you go through that process to make sure that you're being sort of fair to all of the providers that
sure.
that may want to have you using their tech to deliver your event?
Sure, sure. Yeah. Well, it's always the tech events that the Wi-Fi goes down. It's almost an unspoken rule. It's always a thing. I think so how TNW grew, and even today, how we work with the supply networks, it's very much like a festival or a circus.
Yeah.
We have really close relationships with suppliers that have worked with us for some case 18 years every year
Wow.
of the event,
Okay.
and they've grown their businesses through trialing, testing, launching new technologies at TNW. And so what that's meant, and because we've been a small business where we're a startup, we've always been a startup in ourselves. Although obviously we've grown, and we're part of the Financial Times. Is we've been able to have used TNW as a bit of a test bed and sandbox for new things. So I'll give you an example. Last year at the event, the AV company that we work with, that we have a very good relationship with and worked with for some time, they actually launched a new massive see-through screen,
Wow.
which is a new flagship product for us, and we're lucky enough that they want to use TNW as a space to try new things, and therefore
Sure.
that helps us with efficiencies and things like that. So that's the kind of relationship that we have, and we still will forever do that and work with them like that, because it's the best for us all.
Sure. What pressure is there on the venue that you use? Presumably it is in Amsterdam, where the event,
Yeah,
the flagship event takes place. What pressure is there on the venue, and how much do you communicate with them the
yeah.
the nature of your audience, and how critical it is that things like the venue Wi-Fi, are as stable as possible given the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the relationship between event organizer and venue partner is super, super, super key. No matter what size, I think even as a small, hotel conference. I mean, we work very closely with the venue. The event's been in this venue for 3 years now. Prior to that, for 10 years, it was held at another venue within Amsterdam, but we outgrew it. So we work very closely with the venue. We have very, very close contacts, and also we also help them with kind of views, and kind of talk them through what their own infrastructure developments are.
Sure.
And in some cases, with TNW being one of the biggest, if not the biggest business event that takes place there, we also tell them what we need that perhaps other customers of theirs don't. So one area is around transportation. The event is about 20 minutes outside of the centre of Amsterdam, which
Okay.
in Amsterdam is actually quite a lot. Amsterdam is a small
Okay.
city. 20 minutes is for the community here is a long way. I know in London, if you're thinking about going down the XL Olympia, even with the Elizabeth line, it's still that's kind of a good timing.
Yeah.
So we have to do a lot around transportation. And this year we launched a new boat service. So we gave free ferry services from the central station in Amsterdam, where it was 20 minutes on a boat. It was a beautiful summer's day. You could pick up your
Wow.
badge on the boat, and then you get to the event and you're already there. So that's a way that we collaborate with the venue.
And that I guess ties in a little bit with what you were describing as a festivalization of the event. It's starting that event journey and that experience at the earliest possible touch point with the attendees.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd say if I describe the event and to a new person in my team, I'd say we want TNW to be the business event that you have to go to. So we want to have business benefits, but with a festival feeling.
Yeah.
So 50% of the event's outside. So we only use
Okay. Wow.
50% is actual physical structures. And then we also build things. A couple of years ago, we had a big Ferris wheel. Why would you have a Ferris wheel at a business event? Well, you can
Why
have
not?
meetings on there. You can't get off. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
this year we're going to have a Helter Skelter. We have an on-site padel tournament. I'm not sure if people in the UK know what padel is. Padel is like a form of tennis. It's really big
Yeah. I
over here.
played huge,
Um,
huge in Spain and continental Europe. becoming
Yeah.
even bigger over here.
Yeah, so we have a padel tournament where like startups and investors can kind of network whilst playing padel. So these are the kind of stuff that you can only really do if you're really looking at events from a different angle. These are not necessarily areas that we monetize some of these, but this is part of the overall experience and to create for TNW to create more of a moment through
Mm.
through the eyes of the attendee.
And is that and uh, this may sound like somewhat of a cliche, and I don't intend it to be, but a lot of people, when they see tech, they think of tech companies, they think of open plan offices and people sitting around on bean bags and drinking nice coffee and slides down to the office place. But and actually, if we look at the tech industry, they have pioneered a way of working and a way of balancing work and life really, really well. And so, whilst you talk about Ferris wheels and helter skelters and things like that, and on the first hearing of it, you may have event organisers listen to this today and think, that's a bit, I don't know if I'd have that at mine, but that's strikes me as something that is paralleling what a lot of these tech companies have pioneered as working practices and day-to-day working practices. But actually
Yeah.
there's absolute method to it, isn't there? If you put people in a really relaxed environment, they're likely to have better quality conversations.
Yeah, exactly that. People don't feel like they're at work, um, and therefore you have this immediate barrier that is sometimes there when you're in a formal situation. But yeah, I mean the reality is that yes, if you're working for a big tech company, over in Silicon Valley, or there's some beautiful offices in London now. Yeah, there's even in this world of hybrid working, there's some great perks. But the reality is that most of the people that work in technology, the startups around here, they're not experiencing that life. They're aspiring to get to that. They're
Of
aspiring
course.
for them and their companies to give their employees that opportunity. And maybe like Friday drinks and a snack corner is what the reality looks like a bit more for them. But then when they're coming to TNW, those 2 days of the year, they were experiencing that, so they're buying into that. That future world that they're trying to create for themselves and their teams and their businesses.
Absolutely. You mentioned the move after 10 years in the previous venue to the current one that you're in, and also the word sustainable. You did drop that into conversation as well. Was the move to that venue, was there one eye on the long-term growth of the event as well, that you weren't just moving somewhere that allowed you to go up a little bit in scale from outgrowing the previous venue, but also gave you scope from a sustainability point of view to really look at the next 10 years?
Uh, yes, in a sense. I mean, there's also a point where we didn't have a choice because we were outgrowing, and so we had to do something. The current venue we're using more internal space, so therefore less reliance on building structures. And certainly when we're moving venues, it's not something you want to do for 1 year. There's a lot of particularly for operational side. Um, but it did give us the chance to scale the event post COVID again. So the first year the event was back in this venue was 2021. So this is our kind of scaling the event back out since COVID. We were hit very hard in COVID, just as everyone else was. In fact, in 2021, the event was always been in May or June, but it moved to October
Right.
to try and kind of, and
Sure.
even just 2 weeks before the event, they weren't sure whether they were going to be able to run it in the Netherlands. They had quite some restrictions then, so that's the type of thing that everyone that's been around in the events has got their stories around it.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, we've over the last few years in the venue, we've really been able to really scale and have a serious sustainability plan. So that we've always done things. So, for example, the event's been meat free for I don't know the last 5 years at least, and we have rules for ourselves. For example, 90% of the suppliers come within 90 minutes of the venue, so we're reducing truckload. We obviously have the transportation plan where we provide public transportation for attendees to reduce things like cars and stuff like that. But what we really worked on for the last between 2022 and 2023 was around two key areas. The first was around the use of things like wood and signage that would be reused. So we build 90% of our booths are turnkey booths that we build ourselves,
Yeah.
but they're very highly produced. So it's a high production event, and obviously a lot of wood's involved in that. And what we did this year is we actually changed that. So now we have our own aluminium frames. So a large part of the exhibition is kind of like a jigsaw.
Yes.
And it's now in storage in a nice warehouse somewhere in Amsterdam that I have no idea where it is. But that meant that our reliance on wood massively reduced. And then the other thing that we did this year, we were the first business event in the Netherlands that banned single-use cutlery at the event. So there was no single-use plastic, single-use cutlery at all. So we had these kind of cleaning stations where people were going and returning their plates, their coffee cups, everything. And then it was at the back there was a massive cleaning kind of conveyor of people.
Yeah.
And what it meant is so our the waste which we sent to landfill reduced by 90%.
Wow.
So in 2022 it was 12,000 kilograms of waste, and this year it was 1,100, which is, obviously I would love that to be zero, but
Yeah.
it's a massive change throughout the year.
And you raise it. And another interesting point that dovetails with conversations that we've had on the podcast about sustainability, which is people making the mistake of thinking they've got to go from there to zero in order to make
Yep.
a difference. And the amount of people that we've spoken on this podcast, and if you just search for sustainability as a topic and pick out some of our previous episodes, you'll find that by and large everyone agrees that it is about small steps. 90% is absolutely awesome, but the reality for a lot of events will be a small steps over a period of years to make those sort
Sure.
of reductions. But it's important that they
Of
do
course.
that.
Of course. No, I agree. Yeah, no, I'm not saying I think everyone should be able to achieve that in a year. And I was honestly, I was quite shocked when I saw that stat. It was this morning I saw the stat, which was top of mind. But yeah, it's small digits every year, and it's still an impressive thing that we should all be working towards.
How much of that relates to pre-show, pre-event communications and actually letting the attendees know what you're doing rather than dropping it on them there? Because adoption is going to fall flat on its face if you haven't told people
Mhm.
in advance what they can expect.
Yep, sure. Yeah, you're right. And even the biggest learning for us to get to take the next step is even more around communication. So in our communication marketing program, after people have signed up, when they're getting more logistical information on our website, how we're coaching our attendees through, we're quite lucky, but also this is an important part, is our audience tend to be very passionate about this, and we expect that if we aren't doing the right thing in this space, we expect to be called out on it.
Mm.
So we tend to have a very yeah, passionate, and it's an important thing for them to be passionate about. So you have to do
Yeah,
the right thing.
and sustainability. I've also learned. Wouldn't even say I'm remotely an expert in this, but what I have done is learn a lot through doing this podcast and through being involved in a sustainability related event show now, Event Sustainability Live, that launched last year. How closely aligned previously separate entities are in terms of the subjects of sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI is now very, very much aligned with topics like sustainability. Whereas we would
Yeah,
compartmentalize them up until 4, 5, 6 years ago as individual
yeah,
things. I'm more and more realizing that all of these are effectively one and the same. DEI, we can often think, oh, this is just about gender and ethnicity, in the same way that we can think about sustainability as just reducing our plastic use or recycling things. But it
hmm
comes down to practices, it comes down to human resources, it comes down to training, it comes down to how accessible we make our events to people with physical but also with hidden disabilities. What are your own sort of
yeah,
takes on DEI and how that does tie into things like sustainability?
yeah, yeah. I agree with you on it, and it being that they are being much of one broader thing. In fact, one of the content themes of the event is called Sustainable Futures, and inside that we cover climate tech, DEI, also things like future of work. So we even externally in our content treat that, and through our communications people. So we call it conference responsibility. We
Yeah.
don't actually say the word sustainability or DEI as a program.
Great.
It's much
Great.
part much part of that. So very aligned on that. Yes, I mean, for some time we've had internal programs and projects that are focused around diversity of speakers,
Yeah.
um, and attendees, and having things like sensory free zones within the event, and the accessibility, for example, for things like that. But there are other things that other challenges that I think that we face. This is I'm not sure if this is a challenge here for us in the Netherlands, or if this is a broader challenge. I can only speak my experience, but we also face challenges around a policy level around being able to track things like this. So we're in touch, and we're collaborating at a policy level with the government here around how are you creating data around this, how are you tracking this, and we're working with we created a Dutch DEI coalition around the event last year that was led by one of the Dutch government agencies, and we're really trying to map what the challenge is, and then also then use
Yeah.
the event as a source to help them collect data to help businesses and events in this space. And then the two other areas that this is also on a personal level, actually, even for me. So I have quite an interesting story. I didn't go to university. I've been working in events since I was 17. And the first two events businesses I worked for would only hire graduates. So the fact that I'm even here now, 13 years later,
Interesting.
without
Yeah.
without actually being qualified for the roles that I had when I was 17 is also something. And actually DEI and different perspectives, even different forms of education, is a form of DEI. It really is if you think about it. So I'm
No,
very passionate about this as well.
that's a really interesting point to raise there about inclusion, and how we do prohibit people from moving or working into certain sectors purely based on qualifications. Now, admittedly, you don't want somebody performing surgery on you in a hospital who's not been
Yeah.
to medical school and had some degree of education. So, there are caveats to this. But in the world of technology, particularly, if you think about, you know, younger generations, I've got two sons, one of whom's 20 years old and one who's 17 years old. So they've grown up fundamentally in a world of touchscreen tablets, of quick, fast internet, of technology, and they don't have to learn how to use this stuff. They just intuitively know how to use it, from a hardware point of view, and I guess that opens up a whole other subject of debate as to,
Mm.
in the modern working environment, do you necessarily need academic qualifications if, depending on the job role and what you're required to do, you've actually got some way of proving that you have the knowledge and the basis of understanding to do that?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Yeah, I think 13 years later, I think I'm qualified to be an event director. I hope those around me agree. But I also, I have a lot of smart people around me that are, very well educated, that are way better than me in certain parts of business. So I think honestly, being my this is my opinion is I think being successful and growing your own career is not just about being the smartest, knowing everything. It's about building the smartest team, and being able to work with people and get those people rocking. That's really, especially in a business like events where it's such a team sport. That's ultimately why I think has been important for me.
Absolutely, and anybody listening to this today works, works in events, knows that it is always a collaborative effort. It is the sum of all parts. And the best event teams and the events that are delivered most successfully, and ultimately have the best time doing it. Because I've never met anybody who works in events and they absolutely hate it. They all love it.
Mhm.
They all love doing it, and part of that
Yeah,
is working with people who have different skill sets, where your own input, combined with somebody else's input and somebody else's input on top of that, brings you a collaborative outcome that gives us a level of satisfaction that's probably unmatched in any other industry, I would argue,
yeah, yeah.
in terms of that collaborative approach. It's been great having a chat with you today, Zach, and we've flown through time. And apologies for the false start that thankfully nobody hears. We've yet to put out a blooper reel of the Event Industry News podcast. It would be interesting to maybe keep a blooper reel for the end of the year as a little Christmas bonus, or the false starts that I sometimes make on these recordings. But no, genuinely, thanks for joining us today. It's been great to have you on and get a bit of an insight into the work that you do. Before we do wrap up, if people want to find out more about TNW and the business as a whole and what you're doing, point them in the right direction for us.
Yeah, I mean, connect with me on LinkedIn. Zach Butler. I think you search me on LinkedIn. I'm not sure how many Zach Butlers there are. You can find TNW from there, but it's thenextweb.com. And then also happy for people to email me. So zach@thenextweb.com or
Fabulous.
zach.butler@ft.com, however you like.
It's all on there, and I can assure everybody that if you go to thenextweb.com, from that point, as you would expect from the type of business that you are, really easy to navigate, loads of great information on there. I've had a little look through that before I came on the link today to record this podcast with Zach. So yeah, head over to thenextweb.com to find out more about what those guys are up to. And on the subject of where to go, what to do, and pointing people in the right direction, thanks very much for listening to today's podcast. If you're doing so via your audio podcast provider, please make sure that you also head over to eventindustrynews.com to check out the latest news, features, special supplements, and of course the A to Z supplier directory. If you're looking for a product, service, or supplier within the events industry, the chances are you will find it listed within the A to Z supplier directory over on eventindustrynews.com, where of course you can find video versions of all of our podcasts. You may of course started your journey today by going to the website and watching the video version of this podcast. If you have, thank you very much for tuning in and watching this episode today. Please do also go in the opposite direction, search for the Event Industry News podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, and make sure that you are subscribed so that you receive the latest episodes as they drop each week. Thanks again to my guest today, Events Director for TNW, Zach Butler, who's joined us from their base in Amsterdam at the end of what no doubt has been a busy working week for you. Zach, it's been great to speak to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, James. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll see you all on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye, everybody.